Denver Broncos rookie cornerback Kris Abrams-Draine might be the most underrated pick in the 2024 NFL Draft for the Broncos. We'll tell you why and much more in today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Broncos Country, what's up? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much once again to everybody in Broncos Country, you included, for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day every single day. Just a reminder, you can get Locked on Broncos for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So make sure you subscribe or you follow so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team every single day, all year long, for all the objective, up-to-date coverage of all things orange and blue. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Feed your competitive side with Monopoly Go. It's the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. I'm Cody Roark. I'm covering the Broncos for Mile High Sports as a reporter, joined alongside every single day here by Sayre Bedinger. He's the site expert over there at predominantlyorange.com. And Sayre, look, we're continuing our NFL rookie profile series, looking at all the Broncos draft selections and analyzing their fit from realistic expectations, how they factor into the potential rotation at their position. And more importantly, we like to do a scouting report, which we're going to kick things off here on the Broncos selection. Cornerback Kris Abrams-Draine out of Mizzou, a fellow Mizzou alumni. He's now a member of the Denver Broncos, going to be in that secondary as well, and has a little bit of everything to him that he's going to bring to the table, whether it be on the outside or whether that be on the inside, which is going to be very interesting to see how everything plays out here, especially as rookie minicamp comes up here on Friday, and then also leading into OTAs and then training camp in July. I tell you what, it's going to be busy over here at Locked on Broncos.
It really is. Look, I mean, we're in May right now, but hey, I mean, training camp is going to be here before we know it, the blink of an eye. So buckle in, Broncos Country. But I really like this pick, Cody. I feel like this is one of maybe the most underrated picks the Broncos made. I know that we've obviously talked a ton about Bo Nix, the quarterback. Was it Troy Franklin, getting his teammate, and Audric Estime, who we'll do an episode on soon as well, the running back who could potentially factor into the team's plans. But man, the cornerback, it's kind of just like, well, we expect it to be Riley Moss or Damari Mathis maybe, or maybe even Levi Wallace. So it's kind of like, this guy's not going to play right away. Let's not really focus on that pick very much. When you look at this pick, he might be one of the best values the Broncos got. A second-team All-American in 2023, 4 interceptions, 13 passes broken up last year, and really made a habit of making plays on the football while he was at Missouri. And that's one of the things that I think stands out the most to me when watching him, is the fact that he just knows how to get his hands on the ball. When you have ball skills as a corner, we talked about that with Ja'Quan McMillian a couple of years ago when the Broncos signed him as an undrafted free agent. We're sitting there saying, man, this guy was an All-American at East Carolina, and the reason for it is because he got 9 interceptions or whatever it was in his final season there. If you can get your hands on the ball, NFL teams can work with your other traits. I mean, he doesn't have the best size and things like that, but man, this guy, he's got some skills out there. And when you can make plays on the ball, create opportunities for the offense to get more time out there on the field, that's exactly what you want from a corner. And I think this guy brings it to the table, Cody. He's really, kind of underdrafted from where people expected him to go.
Well, a lot of people are wondering about this pick as well. And they're like, well, how's this going to impact, a guy like Ja'Quan McMillian? We'll talk about that a little bit later on here in the show. But I think you look at maybe where the fit is. Sean Payton told us the vision for Kris Abrams-Draine is going to be like he's this hybrid inside-out guy. Like he can play in the slot, he can play on the outside. If you go on and you put on his tape from games at Missouri, he does a lot of that. He floated around quite a bit for their defense. But I'll tell you the thing that stands out to me when kind of scouting him and just watching him, I always look at a couple of things, right? As a former defensive back, all right, how often is he playing press? How often is he playing off-ball coverage? And what does his technique look like, right? Like when he's playing press, I think he does a really great job of mirroring receivers off the line of scrimmage. He's got really good mirror tech. He's got good hand placement when he goes to punch a receiver and jam coverage. And he understands, I think, what I've gathered from just watching him, he understands route combinations very effectively, right? So if he's playing on the outside, I'll give you an example in this. There was one, I think they were playing against LSU. They're playing zone coverage. He's on the outside. You can tell it's zone because he's opened up facing the quarterback, right? And he's not necessarily at 5 yards. He's not in a neutral stance where he's just facing a wide receiver. He's kind of tilted a little bit there. That's zone coverage. And the one thing I noticed there, I think it was a trips formation to his side, and he was communicating something to the nickel guy and to the safety because the receivers had a certain split, right? They were within, I think, 5 yards within each other, which means usually in that situation, you're communicating as a DB, okay, hey, if they've got splits that are within 5 yards of one another, you have to understand that these guys could cross at some point and intertwine. So maybe number 2 gets to the outside and number 1 goes inside. You have to have that communication from your slot to your safety. And I think he does a really good job of recognizing, hey, I've been watching film all week. It's trips. They're within 5 yards, the number 1 and number 2 receiver. And this must mean, okay, they might run a post wheel, right? So the number 1 receiver will run a post. The number 2 receiver will run a wheel route. Ideally, if you're in zone coverage, which I think they were in cover 4 there, which means you have 4 guys covering quarter. What happens in that situation is he's got to maintain outside. He's got to be able to, prevent anyone from getting behind him. He did a really good job of that. And then they had a couple of other situations. So his route recognition is very, very good. He's good at communicating. I think that's the number one thing. Like, remember last year, Denver, when we were watching that Miami game or the first couple of games, even going to the Chicago game, Denver struggled with just communication in their secondary, and it led to them getting torched in several big instances with chunk plays. I mean, we were talking about, like, what's up with these chunk plays that they're surrendering 20-plus yards a pop, especially against Miami. You have a guy like Kris Abrams-Draine who's undersized, but you know what he makes up for? Like, for him being undersized, he makes up for a lot of that by being one of the smartest football players on the field. And I think there's a reason why Sean Payton, George Payton, the scouts, they identified him as one of those guys. I thought Daniel Jeremiah had a lot of great things to say about him. The moment he was drafted, they were talking about what they liked. They liked the fit there because he's one of the better cornerbacks in this year's class in terms of, like, down the, not your top guys that you saw obviously this year, but kind of down the list, like not getting enough respect in terms of being underrated. I think that praise right there is great, but now he's going to have to come in. He's going to have to compete. And that leads us to our next question here, Sayre. How does Draine factor into the cornerback rotation or even the competition? Can he see playing time this year on the field? Well, Broncos country, that's something that Sayre Bedinger and myself, we're going to dive deep into here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos country, today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook. And as you all know, at FanDuel, they are America's #1 sportsbook. And right now is a great time to get in on the action because it's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL with the playoffs starting up, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Whether you're a Colorado sports fan, you got the Denver Nuggets in the second round of the playoffs. You're a Colorado Avalanche fan, you've got them in the second round of the playoffs. If you believe that they're going to win that series, you can bet on that inside of the FanDuel Sportsbook app. And right now, new customers, they get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So if you go on as a new customer here today, you place a $5 bet, whether that's on the money line, whether it's on the spread of a game, and your bet wins, you're automatically going to get $150 in bonus bets that you can use on money line, spreads, player props, and more. If you think the Nuggets are going to win their series against the Minnesota Timberwolves in 7 games, you believe it's going to go the distance there, and you think they're going to win, well, guess what? FanDuel is a place where you can put that on the line. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook.
Kris Abrams-Draine may be a 5th-round pick, but he could be a factor for the Denver Broncos at their cornerback depth chart in 2024. Cody and I are going to break it down on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, but we want to say thank you to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, free and available everywhere that you listen to podcasts, as well as you can watch the show on YouTube and engage with us and other members of Broncos country. And go subscribe over to YouTube if you haven't already. It's a growing community over there, so you want to go ahead and do that. But let's talk about this pick a little bit more and the fit. Where does he factor into the Broncos 2024 plans? Because you talk about day 3 picks, you're hoping for a number of things. You're hoping for upside. You're hoping for maybe some special teams ability. But best case scenario for the pick is, this guy could become a starter for you. And we've seen like Caden Stearns. He was a 5th-round pick that quickly got into the rotation, even for Vic Fangio. Kris Abrams-Draine, Cody, according to Pro Football Focus, 34 forced incompletions since 2021. That's a long period of time to be having that level of production. But guess what? That was the best in all of FBS. That was the most forced incompletions for any player in FBS since 2021. So are we underselling him as a 5th round pick? It's kind of the same conversation with Troy Franklin, where we kind of said, well, yeah, as a 4th rounder, you hope he factors into the rotation. It's, I don't know, you get a guy late like this and he's expected to go much higher. The conversation is a little bit different, I feel, in terms of, especially in the Broncos context right now, a cornerback.
Yeah, and I think you have to factor in, we already know one cornerback spot is on lock, and I think obviously that's PS2, no brainer, not even a question there. I would even make the argument, I feel like Ja'Quan McMillian's spot in the nickel is also on lock here, but here's the ploy here, maybe where we're going to see a little bit more Kris Abrams-Draine potentially as a rookie here. You need to have another guy behind Ja'Quan McMillian that can do the things that Ja'Quan can. And Abrams-Draine is a guy that can do that. He can fit that role, but he can also help you by playing on the outside. I think so much of this season, what we're going to see now, especially with Jim Leonhard as the DB coach and also as the passing game coordinator, and Christian Parker had a very, very similar philosophy, but I felt like the team had comfortably established roles for guys in the past 2-3 seasons so far in terms of what they were able to do. But I think under Jim Leonhard, we're already seeing it with the safeties. Like we talk about post safety, box safety. We talked about that with Brandon Jones coming on and, replacing Justin Simmons, essentially. Caden Stearns, PJ Locke. These guys are going to have to play. They're going to have to know both those safety roles. I think the same expectation is here for Jim Leonhard, is that even though Patrick Surtain is going to be a guy who's on the outside, he's also going to be a guy that's going to line up in the slot sometimes this year. Ja'Quan's going to have to be able to play on the outside this year. And I think the same thing here from Abrams-Draine. So I think it's about establishing early on, how can this guy get on the field right away as a rookie, or do you need him to right away, right? We talk about all the different personnel packages, right? Denver's going to play in the nickel quite a bit. When they're in the dime, who's going to be the other slot guy? I think that's a great question here to ask, especially with Abrams-Draine now being in the mix, because I think ideally before this pick, we were thinking, okay, well, if you go out and you go in the dime package, your other slot player could be either Caden Stearns, PJ Locke, or even a Brandon Jones, right? That was a discussed possibility. I think it maybe changes now a little bit. If you really think that this guy could come in and have an impact inside the slot, which, look, is going to be tough in the NFL, especially with all the rules aimed toward the offense, I wouldn't be opposed to having a situation where you have an Abrams-Draine and a Ja'Quan McMillian in the slot in the dime package. And then you're going to have, obviously, Patrick Surtain, whoever wins the other cornerback job there. And then you're going to have either Brandon Jones, Caden Stearns, or PJ Locke, 2 of those 3 players right there in combination on the back end there. I think you have more positional flexibility going forth. I think Draine gives you that. But on top of that, as there is that ongoing competition we anticipate between Levi Wallace, Riley Moss, Damari Mathis for the other outside cornerback job, you're going to need guys to step up on special teams. And look, not to forget, because he's still on the team, but I don't think he's going to factor into the cornerback competition. Tremont Smith is still on the roster. He's obviously one of their best special teams players. I think by default, he's going to make the team because of his impact on special teams. How does Abrams-Draine get into the mix early on? Special teams is the answer, especially with the way that they formed the new kickoff rules. Can he go out there and make some tackles? Can he go out there and make some plays right away, especially in the preseason? If he can do that, his stock elevates significantly to getting playing time here in 2024.
It does, and I'm glad you brought up the versatility that he brings to the table, and just everybody in that Denver Broncos backfield defensively being able to play a variety of different positions. I do feel like that's going to lend itself toward him potentially being able to get on the field quicker. I mean, definitely an open competition opposite Patrick Surtain right now, as far as we know. I mean, these guys haven't been out there on the field. We haven't been able to see, and you can't even talk anyways about who's taking first team reps and how often, but it's going to be a very intriguing discussion, I think, all throughout training camp and all the way to the end of the preseason. Because when we see the preseason unfold, you see these young guys get out there with all the other young guys, and everybody's like, well, he struggled when he was playing against the third stringers. It's way different when you throw a guy like Kris Abrams-Draine into the mix with the rest of the starters. It's just a different feel. The communication is different. Everybody's on a different level in terms of the way that they're able to play the game. And so it's when you insert him amongst the 10 or 11 other best players on your, defense, that's a way different look than when he's playing out there with the rest of the guys that were undrafted or late round picks, things like that. So I want us to take that into account if we do see him get extensive snaps. I'm speaking way later into the preseason, but I think with this guy, Cody, it's much more of a wide open competition than I think maybe meets the eye. Maybe there is a little more competition for that nickel, although we'd love to see Ja'Quan just take a hold of that role and not give it up for the remainder of the offseason. We'd love to see that because he played so well for a stretch last season. You'd love to see Riley Moss seize that position on the outside opposite Pat Surtain. We don't want another journeyman. No offense to Levi Wallace. I hope he plays well for the Broncos, whatever role he plays, but you want the guys that you drafted highest to go out there and play and succeed and excel. For Kris Abrams-Draine, I don't think anybody would have a problem if he outplayed his draft status by getting into the starting lineup somehow. I don't think anybody would have a problem if he was playing just special teams and being depth for his first season in the NFL. That's the nice thing about this selection is there's no downside to it.
No, there really isn't. And I think also to your point as well, you make a great note about playing with the starters in the preseason. I even think getting reps with the starters in training camp, though, that's something I will not be able to report on or even say. So if you're out there, as a fan attending practice, and you can put it out there on social media, I can't. I get in trouble if I do that. But the thing I would say, maybe keep an eye on, remember last year, Sayre Bassey and Ja'Quan McMillian, both these guys got opportunities in the preseason to play with the starting group in some of those games there. And we're like, okay, hey, both these guys are playing well. I think you also have to factor in, okay, as good as Ja'Quan McMillian was last year, obviously J-Mac is a fantastic player. He's going to be the starter more than likely for them to start the season. You also have to have a plan in case there's an injury, right? You always have to account for that. And I think Abrams-Draine is probably maybe your best insurance policy in terms of a player who plays undersized but plays big, just like Ja'Quan McMillian. That's the thing I would say when you look at these two guys stylistically. They're both really great technicians, can play press man-to-man coverage, can play off-ball coverage, can blitz, can be effective in that regard, and can play special teams. Not like it's an exact clone, so to speak, but it's like these guys play a similar style of football. They're finesse, they're strong. I mean, it's just a combination there that I feel like you can replicate there. Okay, so if Ja'Quan is the guy, well, if something happens to him from an injury standpoint, you do have a guy that you feel like vision-wise, we can plug him in right here, and he can do the things that we're asking Ja'Quan to do as a starter. You have to set the expectation a little bit early for a young player like that. And obviously, I think he's got a really good head on his shoulder, so he's going to be motivated. He's going to have the mindset. We'll see him at rookie minicamp this week, and hopefully the Broncos can start getting guys signed to their rookie deals. So, there's a little bit more protection. Obviously, that's something that we're going to be watching and monitoring here this week on Locked On Broncos. But we also have to ask ourselves the question now, as it pertains to Kris Abrams-Draine, what are some realistic expectations that we have from him if he does see playing time, or what his role could be? We'll dive deeper into that here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country, today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at Monopoly Go. And if you're competitive like me, Monopoly Go helps you scratch that competitive itch, because not only can you play alongside your friends, you can also conduct heists on your friends' vaults and their properties. But it's just a fun game that's ever-changing, and it never gets dull. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. And the more that you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. For example, you can get unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums, which can give you big prizes. There's also cool new playing pieces that you can travel different boards with. They have hilarious emojis where you can taunt friends when you smash their buildings, or if you heist their vaults. If you want to get a leg up on them, you can do that with Monopoly Go. Plus, Monopoly Go, it feels new and exciting every single day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges, and a ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure, or they have a robot pachinko machine, and there's always new timed events that can help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything that you win on Rent Friends or Rent Frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now for free on the Google Play or the App Store. Game on with Monopoly Go. What are some realistic expectations for Broncos fifth-round rookie cornerback Kris Abrams-Draine out of Missouri? Now, Broncos Country, if you haven't seen what he's able to do, make sure you go find some games. Like, the one thing I like about YouTube these days, they upload full college games. You can see good highlights of players. Go check out Kris Abrams-Draine and watch him specifically. Pause it, rewind it, watch it one play like 3 or 4 times just to get an idea as to what coverage they're in. Kris Abrams-Draine is a very, very, very smart football player. high IQ on the field, but also high character, which is something that the Broncos value a lot. So what are some realistic expectations as we talk about maybe him getting on the field here in 2024? Well, Sayre, let's open it up here, my friend. I think ideally speaking, when you look at Abrams-Draine, I think the best case scenario here for the Broncos, he's a special teams contributor all season long. Worst case scenario is like, all right, there's an injury that happens and now he steps up and now he's going to be thrown into the fire a little bit. With that, like there's so many different possibilities that you can look at when it comes to maybe his playing time or him getting on the field. But I think more importantly, we're all curious, how would he respond if being thrown into the fire? Which, look, I think at times the last few years, the Broncos have had several young players who have been called upon, have been thrown into said fire a little bit earlier than expected. You see some guys respond to it. You see some guys maybe not respond to it. Ideally, what is the best case scenario, in your opinion, for Abrams-Draine this season as a Denver Bronco?
Well, I think the best case scenario is the idea that he plays special teams a lot and that they kind of reevaluate the competition at the position after the season. That the best case scenario is that everybody stays healthy, everybody progresses, everybody plays as well as you hope, which in that case, I think means that your starting corners are going to be Pat Surtain, Riley Moss, and Ja'Quan McMillian. I think that's best case scenario. And in the best case scenario, Damari Mathis makes it hard for the Broncos to keep Riley Moss out there in the starting lineup. But Riley Moss played so well that they couldn't. So I think that it's one of those things, Cody, where it's like you want to have the embarrassment of riches. You don't want to have to say, all right, well, these guys are terrible, so Kris Abrams-Draine has to come in and play. You don't want that to have to be the case. But I think the best case scenario for him may be winning the nickel job over Ja'Quan McMillian. Let's say the Broncos outside position is taken care of. I think that may be his most, as we talk about realistic expectations, that may be the most realistic path to him getting extensive playing time in year one. I know Ja'Quan played really well last year, but with Riley Moss coming on this year and the expectation of you traded up for the guy in the third round last year, I think that to me screams that they expect him to start. And with Kris Abrams-Draine coming in, you can't help but wonder, how much did Jim Leonhard factor into this selection? You know, did he have a voice in that draft room to say, hey, let's go out and get this guy. I want him for this role in the defense, or I eventually see him being this. And if he eventually sees him being this, could he become whatever that is quicker? So to me, the realistic expectation is to say he's going to play special teams, that put that 4.4 speed out there. We've seen him cut guys down in the running game, 51 tackles last year for Missouri. So he can do that. He can go play special teams and play a big role. But for individually, for Kris, you know, if he's looking at himself and saying, okay, the best case scenario for me, I mean, he could win the outside corner position. He could win that. But I think with his size and where he's at right now, I think he may be best off in the nickel spot if that's, you know, even available to him.
Well, and I would even say maybe an underrated factor to maybe consider here for Broncos country as well. Probably not talked about enough. I wouldn't sleep on the possibility of Ja'Quan McMillian competing for the outside job as well, in terms of Riley Moss, Damari Mathis, Levi Wallace, because I think the more competition you can have there, the more clearly you can identify, or at least get looks early on, right? Because we saw Ja'Quan, his first ever NFL action came against Mike Williams and the Los Angeles Chargers on the outside. And we're like, where did this guy come from? Like, who is he? And then all of a sudden, like, his story, very incredible, obviously. And now you see Ja'Quan, the year he had last year in the nickel was fantastic. One of the best nickel defenders in all of football. But ideally, if he can go out there and even throw his name to the competition for the outside job, being able to play inside outside, I think is a huge benefit to him. Obviously, for Jim Leonhard, I know philosophically, if you look at his defenses, he wants guys to do that. But in the draft process and the scouting process here, you know, because Jim Leonhard did come on a little bit earlier on in this offseason portion here for the Broncos after the team lost Christian Parker, Vance Joseph, obviously those two guys have to be on the same page with so much of their conversation about personnel, philosophy, right? If Vance wants to dial up a blitz, Jim Leonhard's responsibility is what type of coverage can we be in that'll allow the blitz to get home, but more importantly, not put us in a position where we're going to get burnt in a big time way. And then the balance is about trying to figure out prototype wise. It's not just about Vance. It's also about what, like Sean, like there's, I think when it comes to the scouts and the coaching staff, it's going to go, scouts are looking at all these players. The coaches are saying, these are the type of players that we want. Like, these are the type of player types that we're looking for to fit our scheme. And that goes with Vance, that goes with Jim Leonhard, and also aligned there with Sean Payton. And that's where they have those discussions about this guy can maybe add something to our room that we don't have, or this guy adds, I think, to the depth that we most desperately need at this position, because if one guy goes down, we don't have to worry. We don't have to go out there scouring the waiver wire for some veteran or getting a guy off the street and saying, hey, come in and play football for us. We're going to need you because this guy got injured. It seems like Denver's approach this offseason, from the draft process, from free agency and everything else kind of combined there, is identifying that vision early on for this roster, going out there and getting the players in free agency, the NFL draft, and maybe even undrafted rookie free agency, and saying, okay, if one guy goes down, we have a plan in place for the next guy up. And if that guy goes down, we have a plan in place for that next guy, because as we know in the NFL, injuries, they can pile up quickly. The Broncos, they've experienced that quite a bit over the last couple of years. And you see with other teams around the league, I feel like Denver's approach here has been to be proactive when it comes to building the depth on this roster.
And what did Vic Fangio once say about the cornerback position, right? When it comes to corners, essentially you're in the nickel majority of the time in today's NFL. So that means there's 96 starting cornerback spots, for lack of a better term there. So there's 96 spots. Vic Fangio's like, there ain't 96 corners out there.
No.
So you've got to have that. If you can have depth at the position, you're in an enviable spot. That's why we saw the Philadelphia Eagles, Cody, with already, I know James Bradbury had a bad season, but James Bradbury, Darius Slay, they still go out and they draft Cooper DeJean and Quinion Mitchell from Toledo. Vic Fangio knows you need depth at the cornerback position. And so I think in the Broncos context now, it's like, all right, we have all these young guys. You know, we got Riley Moss, we got Ja'Quan McMillian, Pat Surtain, we got Damari Mathis, we brought in Levi Wallace. You can't have too many corners because of the war on attrition in the NFL, because the volatility of player development, which we saw last year with Damari Mathis kind of having a down year, and not really kind of, I mean, it was a bad beginning of the season. And you have to have options. You have to have somebody that you can turn to and say, well, we like this guy's upside. You don't want to be turning to, no offense, you don't want to be turning to the Fabian Moreaus of the world during training camp. Like that to me last year was worst case scenario. Riley Moss gets injured at training camp. Damari's kind of having a rough, go of it.
He got hurt there too.
He got hurt at camp as well. Essang Bassey was obviously not playing above replacement level. So you had to go out and get a veteran that's like, this guy's at least started in the NFL. I mean, we need somebody. All of your young depth was depleted. And so for the Denver Broncos, they're like, we're not making the same mistake this year. We've got Levi Wallace, who he's not a training camp free agent acquisition. He's a free agent acquisition. And we believe that he can play, but we have all these young guys that we want to see what they've got first. Kris Abrams-Draine gives you an upside play at an important position, a premium position in today's NFL. And with his ball skills, a former wide receiver here we're talking about, this is a guy that I think that you could really bank on outplaying his NFL draft status.
In Broncos country, we are excited to see a little bit more of Kris Abrams-Draine. Rookie minicamp is this Friday in Dove Valley. Then OTAs will be sprinkled out throughout the next month and a half. And then once June comes around, you're going to see, I think, the final portion of OTAs, mandatory minicamp, and then the players are off for a month. Then they're going to be back for training camp, which we anticipate is going to be the first week of August or end of July. The buildup is here as Broncos football is approaching. We want to know your thoughts if you're watching or listening to Locked On Broncos, wherever you get your podcast, your thoughts on Mizzou cornerback Kris Abrams-Draine. What are your realistic expectations for him in 2024? With that said, Broncos country, we appreciate you. That will wrap up today's episode of the show. As we continue our NFL Draft Player Profile series, tomorrow's episode, for all you everydayers out there, we're going to take a look at Audric Estime, running back out of Notre Dame. What is he going to bring to the table for the Broncos rushing attack alongside Javonte Williams? We're excited about that pick, and we'll break it all down and much more on tomorrow's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. We'll see you then.